So we're going to go ahead and start with our trig functions and talk about how to find a trig function for any angle. So let's start with the 30 degrees or pi over 6. All right, so now that we've talked about reference angle sum, we know that this is 30 degrees or pi over 6. And then we also have the reference angle over here, where it's measured from here, or here is 30 degrees, or here is 30 degrees for pi over 6. So when you're looking at all of these functions, all of these values for 30 degrees, 150 degrees, 210 degrees, and 330 degrees. Now notice, those are all easily divisible by 3. And for pi over 6, the reference angles that you're going to have for pi over 6 start at pi over 6, then 5 pi over 6, 7 pi over 6, and finally 11 pi over 6. All of those are going to have the same point on the unit circle. The only thing that you have to worry about is the sign, meaning is it going to be positive or negative. Now, in the first quadrant, they're all positive. In the second quadrant, x is negative, y is positive. In the third quadrant, both values are negative. And in the fourth quadrant, x is positive and y is negative. Now we have a mnemonic for that, and the mnemonic that we use is, if you look at this quadrant, all are positive here. The sine and the secant are positive in the second quadrant. The tangent and the cotangent are positive. And the cosine and the secant are positive here. And that is because of x and y values, because both x and y are positive here. Sine is positive in this second quadrant because y is positive. Tangent is positive here because when the x and the y are both negative, it is a positive. And the cosine is positive here because x is positive. So the mnemonic that you can use is all students take cash. And that will help you figure out whether or not the sign of those trig functions are positive or negative. So for all of these angles, you know that the sine of 30 is going to equal 1/2. Now, if you want to go ahead and talk about what that value is in the other quadrants, then I know that the sine of 150, which is in the second quadrant, is also positive 1/2 because they're both in quadrant 1 and quadrant 2. And then if I go to the sine of 210, that's going to be negative 1/2. And the sine of 330 degrees, that will also be negative 1/2. Do the same exact thing for cosine, only all of the values for cosine of 30 degrees is going to be the square root of 3 over 2. Then the cosine of 150 degrees is going to be negative square root of 3 over 2. The cosine of 210 degrees is going to be a positive 1/2, negative 1/2. And the cosine of 330 degrees is equal to positive 1/2. And I just noticed to find the tangent of any of those values, the tangent is just the sine over the cosine. So the tangent of 30 degrees is going to be positive 1/2 over positive square root of 3 over 2. Those 2's do just cancel out because they are both in the denominator, and you're left with 1 over the square root of 3. You have to rationalize that by multiplying by the square root of 3 over 3. So the tangent in this case is square root of 3 over 3. The only thing that changes with that is the signs going along. So then you know that the tangent of 150 degrees is going to be negative square root of 3 over 3. The tangent of 210 degrees, because it is in the third quadrant, is going to be positive square root of 3 over 3. And lastly, the tangent of 330 degrees is going to be negative square root of 3 over 3. So let's look at one of the reciprocal functions. They can be a little bit tricky to work with. So let's go ahead and try to find the cosecant of 11 pi over 3. Now, first thing you should notice is that 11 pi over 3 is greater than 2 pi. So as I'm drawing this, I have to go around the unit circle once. So let's first find that matching terminal angle. So as I'm going around the unit circle, one time I go around is 2 pi. So what is left would be 11 pi over 3 minus 2 pi. And 2 pi is going to take that form of 6 over 3. So then you are left with 5 pi over 3. Now, how do I know what quadrant this is in? Well, this is going to be pi. That would be another way of saying pi, remember, is that's just 3 pi over 3. So it is definitely larger than that. And down here, this is 3 pi over 2. And 3 pi over 2 is about 1.5 pi's, where 5 pi over 3 is 1.6 repeating, so it's larger. So that means I'm going to go all the way around, and I'm going to end up right here in the fourth quadrant. Now, because I know the denominator is 3, I know this has a reference angle is pi over 3. And the point on the unit circle of pi over 3 is 1/2, comma, square root of 3 over 2. So the cosecant of 11 pi over 3 has the same value as 1 over the sine of pi over 3. But then we also have to figure out whether it is plus or minus. Well, using our mnemonic, all students take cash. So the only thing that is positive in the fourth quadrant would be the cosine, and the reciprocal of the cosine, which is the secant. So that tells us that the value of this function must be negative. And because this is the sine, it is going to be 1 over the y value, or negative 1 over the square root of 3 over 2, which when you simplify that will equal negative 2 over the square root of 3. Now you rationalize that, which becomes negative 2 square root of 3 over 3. Just to note, whenever it is 1 over a fraction, that is equal to the reciprocal of whatever the denominator is.